Hello everyone, Oddsprite here. Welcome into the studio. This is a track-by-track look into The Food, the sweetest synth pop used before 2043. That's quite the shelf life. This song was inspired by the book Ultra Processed People, written by Chris Van Tullochen. After that damning inspection of the industrial food industry, I just knew there was a song in there. The premise: in 2043, the biggest food company launches the perfect formulated food. The marketing is retro, the ingredients all chemical. One concerned employee hijacks the launch and whistle blows to the world. The concept was to create a dystopian feel through contrasting a very upbeat sound in a major key with lyrics that convey a dark message. The intention was for a "this is too good to be true" undercurrent throughout the whole song. This song has got a very simple instrument set. I used battery for drums, Massive X for all the synth and effects, and my voice for the lyrics. Plugins were mainly stock in Logic or from Izotope, being Nectar, Neutron, and Ozone. This is a synth pop song with a techno rumble. I'll cover that in a bit. Moving into Logic, we'll start with the drums. So I used battery for this song, and I found a kit called Diamonds. The only elements I used from this kit were the percussive elements. A lot of battery kits come with chords and bass stings and stuff like that. I only wanted the percussive elements from this one. Battery is in multi-track mode, so that gives me control over the panning and volume of each individual element. And that's all been put into a track stack here. In terms of drums, this is the main drum loop in the verse. Fairly standard drum rhythm there. It varies slightly throughout the track and picks up a bit of pace in the bridge and also the final chorus. I mentioned earlier that this is a song with a techno rumble, which is quite rare for a piece of synthwave, synth pop, new wave, whatever genre you want to put this into. I'll just go through in a bit of detail what I actually did to achieve that. So I've taken two elements here in the kick. Sorry, so let me expand the drums. In the kick and snare going through onto this bus, and there's a whole set of processing going on here. So this is without the rumble. Now I'll add in each of the effects in turn, and you can see how that builds up the rumble sound in the background. It's worth noting that the gain plugin here is for a bit of automation, because as we go through certain transitions, the rumble gets raised. So if we look at, as an example, this transition from the intro to the verse, and you can hear the rumble coming up in the background there. So that's the percussion. As you can see, there are a whole load of instances of Massive X here, including this SFX track. This was bounced out to audio to allow for a bit of manipulation and processing, but the remainder of these remain Massive X instances. The bass is a typical 80s kind of bass, and I used an arpeggiator to go from the intro bass to the bass throughout the rest of the track. Apart from changing chord progressions, it maintains the same pace throughout. If we pair that with the drums, you see it syncs up nicely to provide a nice dancey feel. In terms of processing, a little bit of EQ just to boost the low end by a tiny amount, and this also has some sidechain compression on it just to add to that dancey feel. Blue Jupiter is the main chords. Throughout the intro, this builds up a bit of processing and effects. So I've got Kilohearts trance gate on here, which I'd love for providing kind of dancey syncopated rhythms to things. So you'll hear this come in as we go through the introduction. There's also a bit of sidechain compression on this as well to add to that kind of dancey pumping feel. I've also added an EQ to roll off all of the low end, as in the bottom register in the intro. This was really crowding out the bass, so to keep them nice and separate, I just cut that off. There's also a gain plugin here, as throughout the song this kind of fades in and out. So a nice classic saw synth pad there. And you can hear there the trance gate really start kicking in as we get into the verse. I've also put a reasonable amount of reverb on this. Worth noting that I tend to practice having a reverb bus for most of the tracks. There are a couple of elements that also have their own reverbs, such as the rumble and the vocals, which I'll get into later. But my reverb of choice for that is RAM by Native Instruments. It just has a wonderful sound to it, and it's quite versatile. In terms of other synth elements in the track, we've got a few synths, again from Massive X, providing motifs. So the first of this is a patch called Trance Nation. Again, there is a low filter here. So a nice, playful, plucky synth. And there's another motif provided by this deep ocean synth. Similar to the other one, just has a low frequency roll off to avoid interfering with the bass. A few playful plucks in line with the chord progression, just to add to the playful mood. So these two elements play off each other like this. And if we add the drums in, you can see how those play in. Things change a bit when we get into the chorus. So the chords and the bass remain largely unchanged. The motifs that these two synths provide, however, make quite a bit of a difference. There's also an additional synth that comes to replace the kind of plucked chords. So this gets an arpeggiator enabled, which sounds like this. And that really plays off against the drums. And then we have this other high pluck synth playing an alternative arpeggiated pattern. This one isn't provided by an arpeggiator, this is played in. And those last few notes, there's a large amount of space provided by the vocals, as you can tell from the waveforms down here. So I really wanted to emphasize those last kind of few notes of the phrase, just to add that playful atmosphere. So I brought back the deep ocean synth just to really highlight those extra notes. It's a really subtle effect, but when you put it together in the whole song, it just highlights the end of the phrase to the listener. The last synth that I've got here is just providing sound effects, and this is a riser. Although calling it a riser is a bit misleading because it doesn't rise, it actually falls. And that just takes us between the transition of the verse and the chorus. The last synth worth mentioning is the bridge. So if I just mute the vocals out here, you'll hear how this transitions in. So I wanted a really 80s happy synth sound, and this is something that I think some of the greats probably would have used at the time, that kind of sawtooth, slightly distorted. This has a bit of compression on it, and I've added a bit of soft distortion to give it that crispy feel. There's a bit of sidechain on it, again from the kick, and low frequency roll off. The vocals are really the main counterpoint of this track. Given that it's written in a major key and has very upbeat mood, I wanted to really undermine that with the tone of the lyrics. The melody though itself is also uplifting, which I think further counterpoints the danger and unsettled nature of the lyrics themselves. My vocal process is fairly straightforward. I do 7 or 8 takes of each main phrase, so that would be the verse, the chorus separately, and the second verse, and any vocal throws, although in this case I wanted a degree of consistency and fitting in with the ultra-processed theme. Both of the choruses are identical, and these little vocal throws are actually trimmed from the end of the chorus. They've got some effects on them to make them sound a bit different, to fit in as more of a throw rather than a lead vocal. In terms of the sound of these vocals, I wanted them to sound very authentically 80s synth pop, so I've done a minimum of processing, and I didn't do additional takes and layering as would be done in a modern track. I wanted them to sound very authentic of that time period. When I record my vocals, I typically have the melody that I'm singing recorded as a piano track that I play within the mix of the backing as well, so it just gives me a pitch point to reference as I sing. And to give you a reference, if I just mute the vocals of what this sounds like when I was recording. So that's not part of the final mix, only used for during recording as an aid. When I record vocals, I set a loop over the phrase that I'm recording, use the take folder function in Logic, and then use quick comping to create a final comp. After that, I then process pitch correction with Melodyne, which then gets bounced, which is what this audio is. In terms of processing, that's all achieved within Izotope's Nectar plugin. I'll take you through the vocal stack step by step to see what each of these things is doing. The first module is providing a bit of additional pitch correction. First up is the noise gate and primary EQ.
How could we feed 8 billion people with minimal waste? 4 staple crops made into many similar pastes. Perfect textures from processed compounds entirely soy-based.
So that gives you some idea there of what that's doing to the overall sound. Moving from the verse to the chorus, I wanted the vocals to sound bigger so that they would amplify the mood, and to achieve that with a bit of automation, I enable the harmony module within Nectar. I've got 2 unison voices, slightly detuned and delayed in the left and right channels, and that sounds like this.
It's the fallacy of technology spoiling our food. Try to understand what's so wrong with bland simple food. Chasing
The entire vocal bus is also sent to the RAM reverb bus just to give an extra bit of reverb tail. The last element of the song is the vocal throws, titled Echoes here, which form part of the bridge and also the closing few bars. As I said, this is just a copy of the end of the chorus with a bit of processing on it. So I've taken a channel EQ to take all of the low end and a bit of the high end off to create a thinner sound, and then used the Byte plugin to provide a bit crush effect, like so.
the fake plastic food.
This works quite interestingly in the bridge because obviously it wasn't quite designed for the chord structure there, but I think it provides an interesting counterpoint to the melody. think it serves to give an element of travel to the whole thing, and more importantly, leaves the listener feeling unresolved. Quite a cruel thing to do as a producer, but it was intentional. Whilst talking about vocals, I'd be remiss not to talk about this particular bus here. So I've got on here an instance of Neutron 4 Unmask. The best way I can describe this is a subtractive dynamic EQ. So I fed in the vocal bus as the sidechain here in Logic. This will then subtract whatever's in the bus coming into this plugin from the other things in the plugin. So a lot of the elements in this track are sent through the bus that this effect is on. Essentially what it's doing is allowing the vocals to stand out just that little bit more in the mix. And I'll show you a bit of an A/B test.
It's the fallacy of technology spoiling our food. Try to understand what's so wrong with bland synth-pop food. Chasing the flavors to be your saviors from every bad mood. It's all in the feel, each wonderful meal.
It's a very subtle effect. I just find it helps the clarity of the vocals to come through. It might not be to everyone's tastes. I quite like vocals to be prominent in songs. If I want to listen to an instrumental, I'll listen to an instrumental. The main difference between the first chorus and the second chorus is that the drum pattern from the bridge is taken over just to provide an extra little bit of energy. There's not a massive difference. Let me show you. That's first chorus, this is second chorus. Did you spot the difference? During mixing, I have Canopener Studio 3 enabled, which gives me an idea of how it would sound on speakers. I do also use speakers, but I find this particularly convenient for doing mixing and mastering and then doing a final check on actual speakers. Lastly, for mastering, I've used Izotope's Ozone. Let's talk about mastering for a minute. There are various ways you can achieve this. One option is obviously paying a mastering engineer to do it for you. For me, this is an interest and a hobby, and I enjoy the audio engineering side of things. Whilst I agree it's difficult to be objective sometimes about your own work, I still find it a valuable part of the process and an enjoyable one. At the time of recording, Logic Pro have just added in their own mastering assistant, which I might try out on one of my later tracks. I've not spent a lot of time with it. I did do an A/B comparison on this track with what I did with Ozone versus that mastering assistant, and the results were surprisingly comparable, at least to my amateur ear. I should stress though that you don't need Ozone in order to achieve a professional sounding master. I have in the past used entirely stock plugins to achieve an acceptable master within Logic Pro, and you can hear that type of approach on my EP Electric Persona. So with Ozone up here, I've looped the first chorus, and I'll enable each module as we go along just to show you what impact it's having and the cumulative effect of the mastering process.
It's the fallacy of technology spoiling our food. Try to understand what's so wrong with bland synth-pop food. Chasing the flavors to be your saviors from every bad mood. It's all in the feel, each wonderful meal, the fake plastic food.
As you can see there, fairly minor differences, and the whole effect is very subtle until we get to the maximizer, which is doing the majority of the work by boosting the loudness of the track. In order to set the threshold here, I used the Logic Loudness meter, which is just a stock plugin. I hope you've enjoyed getting into the ingredients list of the food. Thanks for watching. Until next time.